The night air was thick with tension, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The forest, dark and oppressive, seemed to whisper secrets no one should ever hear. Somewhere deep within it, hidden in the shadows, something stirred, something ancient, something dangerous. But it wasn't just any night. No, tonight the past was coming alive, and with it, a curse that had slumbered for centuries. Aaron stepped cautiously through the woods, the soft crunch of the dried leaves beneath his boots barely audible. He had always been drawn to this forest, its mysteries and strange allure tugging at his curiosity. But tonight there was something different, something that pulled at him in a way he could neither explain nor resist. His heart beat with an unsettling rhythm, and though the moon hung full and cold in the sky, the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. He had heard the stories, old wives' tales like whispered warnings passed down through generations about the ancient curse that hung over his bloodline. His family had never spoken much of it, but there were moments, especially during the quiet of night, when his mother's face would turn pale, her eyes distant, as though haunted by a past too terrible to revisit. Aaron had always dismissed it, attributing the stories to superstitions and old fears. But tonight, something felt different. Something was waiting for him, and it was as if the forest itself was pulling him towards the truth. Aaron was a quiet man, introspective and thoughtful. He had never been the type to act impulsively or seek out adventure. His life up until now had been ordinary, if not somewhat solitary. He had inherited the old family estate, a crumbling mansion on the outskirts of town, and spent his days buried in books, working to restore the place to its former glory. But despite his dedication to the house, there was a restlessness within him, a nagging feeling that something important, something beyond his understanding, was out there. He had always felt as though his life was part of a larger story, one he was yet to fully comprehend. As he ventured deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to close in around him. The path, once clear, became more twisted and uneven, as if it were leading him off course. But Aaron pressed on, compelled by an invisible force. There was something ahead, something that called to him, and his steps quickened as if drawn by a magnet. And then, just as he was about to lose himself in the darkness, he saw her. She stood at the edge of a clearing, bathed in the silver light of the moon. Her presence was both serene and unsettling, like something not quite human, yet undeniably beautiful. Her long, flowing hair shimmered like liquid silver, and her eyes, those eyes, glowed with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. She was both familiar and foreign, a vision that made Aaron's heart race with a strange mixture of fear and longing. "Who are you?" Aaron's voice was barely a whisper, yet it seemed to echo in the silence. The woman did not answer immediately. She merely regarded him with a gaze that was both piercing and knowing, as if she had been waiting for him all this time. Then, finally, her lips parted and her voice, soft and melodic, drifted towards him. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her tone both warning and mournful. "This place is not for you." Aaron's chest tightened, his breath shallow. "I don't understand. What do you mean?" The woman stepped closer, her movements graceful and deliberate. "You are the last of the bloodline, the one they cursed," she said, each word carrying the weight of centuries. "And I was meant to end you." Aaron recoiled, his mind spinning. The stories, the curse. Was it real? Was she part of it? But before he could speak, she continued. "I was meant to make sure your line never survived," she whispered, her voice carrying the sorrow of ages. "But something has changed, something I cannot explain." He stared at her, the words not quite making sense. "You were meant to kill me?" The woman's face twisted with a deep sadness, and for a moment Aaron could almost see the pain in her eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of a truth long buried. "But it is not what I want. Not anymore." Aaron's mind reeled. "Then why are you here? Why are you telling me this?" She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Because," she started, her voice barely above a breath, "I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air, as impossible as they were real. Aaron took a step back, his heart racing in his chest. The woman who had been sent to destroy him, the one whose very existence was tied to the curse on his bloodline, was now confessing something he could not understand. The world around him seemed to tilt, as if the ground beneath his feet had suddenly vanished. No, he whispered, his mind a swirl of disbelief and fear. No, this can't be happening. But she stepped forward, her presence overwhelming. It is happening. You are part of something far bigger than both of us, and I cannot undo it. Not now. Aaron stumbled backward, his thoughts spinning wildly. The world he thought he knew was breaking apart, replaced by a truth he couldn't comprehend. The woman, the vampire, was in love with him, and yet she was bound by a curse that told her to destroy him. How could this be? How could love exist in such a place of darkness? I don't understand. Aaron muttered, his voice barely audible. Why me? Why now? The woman, her face filled with torment, reached out to him, her hand trembling. Because you are the one I was meant to curse, and now I cannot bear to see you die. Her confession hung in the air, thick with the weight of centuries of sorrow and love twisted by fate. Aaron's mind struggled to process the words, to grasp the impossible reality before him. As he stood there, torn between the past and the present, between the curse that had haunted his bloodline and the woman who now stood before him, something changed. He felt it, deep in his bones, a stirring, a shift in the very air around them. The curse was no longer just a shadow on the horizon. It was here, alive and waiting, and Aaron was caught in its web. Aaron stood frozen, the words the woman had spoken echoing in his mind, tumbling over each other like shattered glass. Love? Impossible. How could she, an immortal creature born from the darkness, a being meant to end his family, feel something as fragile, as human as love? His heart raced in his chest, and his breath became shallow as his mind struggled to comprehend the gravity of the situation. The forest around him had fallen, unnervingly silent, the whisper of the leaves now absent, the wind still. It felt as though the very world had paused, holding its breath alongside him, waiting for him to make sense of the impossibility unfolding before him. But there was no time to think, no time to question the strange, twisting fate that had led him here. With a sudden movement, the woman stepped closer, her eyes dark with sorrow. You must understand, she said, her voice strained. I never wanted to hurt you. Never. But the curse, it binds me, Aaron. It's not something I can escape easily. Aaron flinched, taking a step back, feeling the familiar coolness of the night against his skin. The curse. It had always been an abstract thing, something old and distant. But now it felt so real. It was here, pressing in on him, in the air between them, in the wildness of her words. How could you love me? He whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. You were sent to kill me, to end my bloodline. Her eyes flashed with pain, and she reached out, her fingers brushing his arm, her touch cold, like the skin of the grave. I know, she said softly, her voice trembling. I know what I was meant to do, but something inside me, something changed when I saw you. It was like the curse lost its power, like it was no longer the only thing that mattered. The words hit him like a physical blow. He stepped away from her, his mind whirling with confusion and fear. But if you're not going to kill me, then what? What happens now? His words came out in a ragged gasp, the realization dawning on him that everything he had believed, everything he had known, was unraveling in a way he could not control. Her face softened with an expression of deep regret. I don't know, she said, almost to herself, but I can't bear to hurt you, not anymore. A cold shiver ran down his spine. This wasn't just some strange twist of fate. This was something far darker, something that reached back through the centuries to shape their lives. A curse, he thought. A curse that's bound us together in ways we can't understand. Before Aaron could respond, a sharp, distant sound shattered the tension, a cry, a scream, rising from somewhere deeper in the forest. His body jerked in alarm, his instincts screaming at him to move. The woman's expression darkened, and for the first time Aaron saw something else in her eyes, a flicker of fear, of urgency. I didn't think he would come for you, she said, her voice low, almost a growl. But he has. We don't have much time. Aaron's blood ran cold. Who? He demanded, stepping forward. What are you talking about? Before she could answer, the night itself seemed to twist and shift. The shadows around them deepened, and from the darkness emerged another figure, tall, imposing, with eyes that glowed like embers. His presence was a chill that seemed to freeze the very air around them. He wore a cloak as dark as the void, his skin pale and drawn, and his gaze was fixed on Aaron with an intensity that sent a wave of dread through his chest. Aaron! the figure said, his voice low and sinister, carrying with it the weight of centuries. "It's time for you to die." The woman moved quickly, stepping between Aaron and the stranger, her eyes flashing with a fury Aaron had never seen before. "No," she hissed, her voice sharp. "You will not touch him." The man's lips curled into a twisted smile. "You think you can protect him?" he scoffed. "You are bound by the curse, just as he is. There is no escaping it." Aaron took a step back, fear clutching at his chest. This is the curse, he realized. The stranger before him, this creature, this monster, was part of the reason his bloodline had been doomed for generations. The curse wasn't just about death. It was about power, about control. And now it was here in the form of a being who had come to finish what had been started long ago. The woman's face was pale with a mix of fear and defiance. She turned to Aaron, her eyes softening for a moment. "I'm sorry," she whispered almost to herself. "This is not what I wanted. But you're in danger now. We both are." The man chuckled darkly. "Danger? You think you can stand against me, little vampire? You've already failed once, and this time I will make sure your bloodline is erased from existence forever." Aaron's heart pounded in his chest as he took another step back, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had no idea who these people were, what they were, or what this curse truly meant. But there was one thing he knew for sure. His life, as he had known it, was over. "Get away from him!" the woman cried, her voice filled with urgency. Before Aaron could react, the man lunged toward him, moving with a speed that defied reason. The woman stepped into his path, her body colliding with his, pushing him back with surprising strength. "Run, Aaron!" she shouted. "Get out of here! Now!" Aaron's feet felt glued to the ground, his mind still reeling from the shock of everything that had just happened. But when the man reached out again, a vicious snarl on his lips, something inside Aaron snapped. His feet moved, his legs carrying him away from the chaos, away from the terror and toward the dark forest. But he didn't know where he was going, didn't know what he was running from, or even if he could escape the grip of the curse that had bound him. All he knew was that he had to survive. The world around him seemed to spin, the trees blurring as he pushed forward, running with everything he had left. His heart raced with adrenaline, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He had no idea what he had just witnessed, no understanding of the forces at play. All he knew was that his life was no longer his own. As Aaron ran deeper into the woods, the darkness closing in around him, he heard the woman's voice in his mind, soft and pleading. "You're not alone," she had said. "We're connected." But as he ran through the night, his footsteps echoing in the silence, all Aaron could think about was the one thing he knew for sure. His life was about to change forever. Aaron's breath came in jagged gasps as he ran deeper into the forest. The ground beneath his feet was uneven, the trees thick and tangled, their branches reaching out like claws to snag at his clothes. The chill of the night wrapped itself around him, a suffocating cloak that pressed down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. The forest had become an inescapable labyrinth of shadows and darkness, and with every step it seemed to close in tighter. He had no plan, no destination. Only one thought pulsed through his mind: survive. But how? How could he escape a curse that had been laid on his bloodline centuries ago? How could he outrun the darkness that seemed to be chasing him, lurking just behind every tree, just out of sight? The sounds of pursuit were muffled by the thick underbrush, but Aaron could feel them. He could feel eyes on him, watching from the dark, waiting for him to falter, to stumble. She was supposed to protect me, he thought bitterly. But she's gone. She left me behind. The sound of something moving through the undergrowth snapped him back to reality, and he pushed forward with renewed urgency. But then the air grew colder, a sharp, unnerving chill that seeped into his bones. His footsteps faltered, his mind alert to the unnatural stillness that seemed to fall over the woods. The forest, which had been alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, was now silent. Even the wind had stopped. Then he heard it, the unmistakable crunch of leaves underfoot, the unmistakable presence of someone or something behind him. Aaron's heart raced as he turned sharply, instinctively reaching for the small knife strapped to his belt. His fingers brushed the cool steel, but the sound was gone, replaced only by the echo of his own rapid breathing. He stood still, listening, but the silence seemed to press against him, thick and suffocating. He couldn't stop moving. He couldn't afford to. But just as he turned to continue his frantic flight, a shape emerged from the shadows, a figure that was unmistakable. It was her, the woman. "You!" Aaron gasped, his voice hoarse with the terror that gripped him. "What are you doing here?" The woman's face was pale, her silver hair flowing like a veil around her. Her eyes, though, were filled with something different. Desperation, urgency. "I've come to warn you," she said, her voice tinged with panic. "You can't keep running, Aaron. They'll find you. You need to come with me." Aaron took a step back, the knife still gripped tightly in his hand. Who will find me? And why should I trust you? After everything you've said, after everything you've done, how can I trust you now? She stepped forward, her face softening. "I understand your fear, but there's no time to explain. You're not safe here." Before Aaron could respond, a piercing howl echoed through the trees, a chilling sound that sent a shock of terror down his spine. The woman froze, her eyes wide with dread. "They found us." The trees around them seemed to stir with unnatural movement, and before Aaron could even react, a figure lunged from the shadows, fast, fluid, and unmistakably dangerous. It was another vampire, tall and gaunt, with eyes that burned with hatred. He moved with the terrifying speed of his kind, and before Aaron could react, he had the woman pinned to the ground. "Get away from her!" Aaron shouted, his fear turning into anger. He charged at the vampire, his knife raised, but the man effortlessly knocked it from his hand. The woman let out a scream of pain, her form twisting in the vampire's grip. Aaron could feel his heart pounding, the fear clawing at his insides. He had no weapons, no plan, nothing. This was a fight he couldn't win. The vampire, still holding the woman down, looked at Aaron with cold, empty eyes. "You think you can escape?" He sneered. "You think you can outrun your fate? You were always going to die, Aaron. It was only a matter of time." A strange chill ran through Aaron as the words sank in. This is the curse, he realized. It's not just about blood. It's about fate. A fate that's been chasing me my whole life. But even as despair threatened to swallow him, something inside him snapped. He couldn't die here. He wouldn't. With a burst of strength he didn't know he had, Aaron grabbed the nearest branch, ripping it from the ground. He swung it at the vampire, catching him off guard. The man staggered back, momentarily stunned. But Aaron didn't wait. He grabbed the woman's arm and pulled her to her feet, dragging her behind him as he ran. They didn't stop to look back. Aaron's heart raced in his chest as they plunged deeper into the woods, the night alive with danger. The vampire's voice echoed behind them, low and guttural. "You can't escape! You will die, just like all the others!" But Aaron's thoughts were a whirlwind. He didn't care about the vampire's threats anymore. He didn't care about the curse. He had to get out. He had to survive. As they ran, the forest seemed to shift around them. The trees grew thicker, their branches twisting together to form an impenetrable wall. The air grew heavier, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something sour and rotting. The ground beneath their feet became slippery with moss, and Aaron's breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. "We have to keep moving," the woman urged, her voice frantic. Her hand gripped his arm tightly as she pulled him forward. They rounded a corner in the trail, and suddenly there was a sharp noise, a crack of breaking branches. Aaron stopped dead in his tracks. From the darkness ahead, figures appeared, vampires cloaked in shadows, their eyes glowing like embers in the night. Aaron's pulse quickened. The woman gasped. "They're closing in!" The vampires advanced, circling them like predators, their movements swift and predatory. One of them spoke, his voice a low hiss. "You can't hide forever, girl. You've made your choice. Now face the consequences." Aaron stood frozen, fear rising in his throat, but the woman pulled him back. "Get behind me," she ordered, her voice firm now, even in the face of overwhelming danger. "Why should I trust you?" Aaron said, his voice hoarse. She turned to him, her eyes filled with determination. "Because you have no choice, and because I want to save you." Suddenly, the night exploded with sound, screams, shouts, and the crash of bodies colliding. The vampires attacked, and Aaron, heart racing, knew that this was the moment. He had to fight, or he would die here, alone. The night exploded in chaos. The vampires closed in, their eyes glowing with an eerie hunger, their movements predatory and swift. Aaron could hear the sound of their feet scraping the earth, the rasp of their breath in the cold air, like the hiss of serpents. His pulse thudded in his ears, drowning out everything else. His thoughts were a blur of panic and desperation. There was no escape, no way out. He had fought before, but never like this. Never against creatures like these, vampires with centuries of experience, power coursing through their veins, their hunger unquenchable. He had no weapons, no training, just the raw instinct to survive. But there was something else, something in him, something he didn't fully understand, was awakening. It wasn't just the need to survive, it was the need to protect her. The woman stood beside him, her silver hair billowing like a shadow in the moonlight, her face a mask of determination. She had been silent since they had started running, her thoughts, no doubt, as fractured as his. But now, as the vampires closed in, she spoke in a low, urgent voice. "You have to decide, Aaron, now. Are you going to fight, or are you going to run?" Her words hit him like a hammer, a brutal wake-up call. He was no longer just a pawn in some ancient curse. This was his choice, his decision. He had spent his life running from what he didn't understand. Now he had to confront it. One of the vampires, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped forward with a mocking grin. "You think you can fight us? The curse is in your blood, boy. You are nothing but prey." Aaron's heart raced, but he felt something else stirring deep inside him. No more running. His hand went to the small knife at his belt, his fingers closing around the hilt. It felt heavier than it ever had before, as if it was a symbol of everything he had feared and fought against. The woman caught his eye. "Don't let them provoke you. We need to work together, Aaron. If you hesitate, we're both dead." His breath caught in his throat. The words were true. There was no time for doubt, no room for hesitation. With a swift movement, Aaron drew the knife and took a step forward, his body pulsing with a strange energy. The weight of his decision settled over him like a storm cloud, but there was no turning back now. The tall vampire sneered, his fangs bared, and lunged at Aaron. But Aaron was ready. He sidestepped the attack, narrowly avoiding the vampire's sharp claws, and brought the knife down in a swift arc, aiming for the vampire's neck. The vampire hissed in pain, staggering back, but Aaron's strike wasn't enough to take him down. He was fast! Too fast. The vampire retaliated with a slash of his own, knocking the knife from Aaron's hand. It clattered to the ground, useless. For a moment, Aaron froze. He was weaponless, vulnerable, and surrounded by enemies. But then, from somewhere deep within him, a surge of power erupted. His veins burned with a strange, unfamiliar heat, and before he knew it, his hands were glowing faintly with an eerie, otherworldly light. The vampires took a step back, their expressions twisting in confusion and fear. Aaron's gaze flickered to the woman beside him. Her eyes widened in realization. "It's your blood," she whispered. "The curse. It's awakening. You have the power." Aaron didn't understand what was happening to him, but in that moment it didn't matter. The world seemed to slow down, the tension thickening around him. He could feel the energy pulsing through his body, the raw power, the legacy of the curse. He didn't know how he had it or why, but he knew one thing for certain. It was the only chance he had. Without thinking, he raised his hands and the energy surged outward, crashing into the vampires like a tidal wave. The force sent them flying backward, crashing into the trees with a sickening thud. Aaron stood panting, his chest heaving, the faint glow from his hands slowly fading. "That's it!" the woman cried, her voice filled with awe. "You're doing it, Aaron! Use it! Control it!" But Aaron's thoughts were spinning. He had no idea how he had done that, no idea how the curse was suddenly part of him. But it felt real. It's in me. It's in my blood. The remaining vampires, now disoriented and fearful, began to circle them, their eyes full of malice. One of them, the leader of the group, snarled, "You think that little trick will save you? You're still one of us, Aaron. You still have to die." Aaron's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the weight of the vampire's words, but the power inside him was undeniable. This was his chance. The curse was his to control, his to wield. But how? How did he use it? The woman's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. "You have to focus, Aaron. Don't let them break you." In that moment, everything became crystal clear. He wasn't just running anymore. He wasn't just trying to survive. He was fighting for something. For her. For his future. For everything he could still save. He closed his eyes, his breath steadying. He focused on the feeling of the power inside him, channeling it like a force of nature, honing it. His hands crackled with energy again, brighter this time, more intense. The vampires lunged, but this time he raised his hands, and the surge of power erupted like a storm. The force was overwhelming, a flash of light so bright it nearly blinded him. When the light faded, the vampires were gone, flung back into the darkness, crumpled and still. Aaron stood there, panting, his body shaking with the aftermath. The woman, still by his side, stared at him with wide eyes, a mixture of awe and fear in her expression. "You did it," she breathed. "You beat them." Aaron looked down at his hands, still tingling with the remnants of the power. He felt both exhausted and invigorated, as though the curse had been unleashed inside him in a way he had never imagined. But as the silence settled around them, the reality of the moment hit him. It wasn't over. The fight wasn't finished. There were more vampires, more enemies, more challenges ahead. He had won this battle, but the war was far from over. And for the first time in his life, Aaron knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just the victim of the curse. He was its master. The silence that followed the battle was suffocating. Aaron stood motionless, his body trembling from the immense energy he had unleashed. His hands still tingled with the power that had coursed through him, leaving an unfamiliar weight in his chest. It was as if a dam had broken, and the water was still rushing through him, leaving everything in its wake. The woman, whose name still hadn't fully sunk in, despite the battle they'd just fought side by side, approached him cautiously. Her eyes were full of awe, but there was something else there too, a sadness perhaps, or a weary understanding. "You did it," she said quietly, her voice low, almost reverent. Aaron nodded, but the words caught in his throat. Did he really do it? Was this victory? Or had he merely won one battle, only to face the next? The vampires who had attacked him were gone, but there would always be more. And the curse? What was the cost of using this power? The woman took a step closer, her eyes now fixed on his. "But we're not safe yet," she said, her voice firm. "There will be others. They'll be coming for you." Aaron turned to her, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "I figured as much." She studied him for a long moment, then finally spoke again. "You can't keep running, Aaron. You're not the same person you were before. What you did, what you are. It's not just about survival anymore. It's about control." Aaron's brow furrowed, and he couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Control? What kind of control do I have? I can't even control what's happening to me." The woman's eyes softened. She stepped forward, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "But you can learn. You will learn. You have the power now, Aaron. The curse, the blood, it's all inside you. And that means you can choose to fight for more than just survival." For the first time, Aaron looked at her with something resembling understanding. She's right. He had always thought of the curse as something that controlled him, something that had bound him to the darkness. But now it felt different. It felt like something he could use. Maybe, just maybe, he could finally use it to carve a new path for himself. "Then what do we do now?" he asked, his voice quiet but determined. "We can't stay here. We can't stay on the run forever." The woman smiled, a knowing look crossing her face. "No, but there's a place, a safe place. People who can help you understand the power inside you." Aaron hesitated, his mind swirling with conflicting thoughts. He had always been alone, always forced to live in the shadows of his curse, but now, with the woman by his side, with the knowledge that there was a chance, just a chance, that he could learn to control it, he felt a stirring of hope. Maybe there was more to his life than what he had always known. "I'm ready," he said finally, his voice steady and sure. "I'll go with you." The woman nodded, her expression softening. "I knew you would." Together they turned toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to pierce the sky. The quiet expanse of land stretched before them, unknown, untamed, but filled with the possibility of a future that Aaron could now see for the first time. As they walked, the weight of the last few days began to lift. The lingering tension that had coiled around Aaron's chest slowly unravelled, replaced by a quiet sense of determination. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was a shared understanding, an unspoken bond forged through battle and survival. The world felt different now. The curse that had haunted him for so long was no longer just a burden. It was a tool, a weapon he could wield. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking control, about finding a way to choose his fate. They walked for hours, and as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Aaron began to feel the first stirrings of exhaustion. His body, still not fully accustomed to the power he had unleashed, ached with the strain. But there was no stopping now. He had taken the first step, and he wasn't going to stop until he understood the true extent of what he had become. At dusk, they found a small clearing where they decided to rest. The woman, whose name Aaron had finally learned was Alara, busied herself gathering firewood. Aaron, his mind still racing, sat down on a nearby rock, his thoughts swirling in a haze of uncertainty and excitement. He wasn't sure what came next. What was his place in all of this? Was he meant to be the hero? Or was he simply a pawn in some ancient game he couldn't understand? There were too many questions, too many unknowns. Alara sat down beside him, her movements graceful despite the exhaustion. "You're wondering if it's all worth it," she said softly, as if reading his mind. Aaron looked at her, startled. "How did you? Because I've been there. I know what it's like to carry a curse, to wonder if you'll ever be able to live again. But Aaron," she paused, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that pierced through the darkness. "The choice is yours. You have the power to choose. And that makes all the difference." Aaron swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him. For the first time he felt as though the future was something he could shape, something within his grasp. The curse had never been his choice, but this journey, this path, was. "Thanks," he muttered, his voice rough. Alara gave him a small, understanding smile. "You'll see, in time you'll understand, but for now let's rest. Tomorrow we start again." As the fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows on their faces, Aaron allowed himself a moment of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but it no longer felt impossible. He had allies now. And most importantly, he had hope. When they left the next morning, they did so with the knowledge that their journey was far from over, but also with the certainty that they were no longer alone in their struggle. The curse that had once seemed like a death sentence was now something they could fight together. And no matter what the future held, Aaron knew one thing for sure. He was ready for whatever came next. The journey had taken them through wild, untamed lands that Aaron had never imagined could exist outside of ancient stories. Yet, here they were, standing at the edge of the dense forest, staring at what had once seemed an impossible goal. The fortress, the place that held the answers he had been seeking, a place where he could learn to control the curse that had defined his life for so long. Aaron's heart pounded in his chest as he gazed at the looming walls, the ancient stonework weathered by time and battles long past. Alara stood beside him, her expression unreadable as she watched the structure. He could feel her anticipation, but also her caution. She had warned him time and time again that this place was not a sanctuary, but a crucible. If they succeeded here, they would walk away stronger. If they failed, the consequences would be dire. "Are you sure about this?" Aaron asked, his voice low. Alara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the gates. "There's no turning back now," she said softly, her words both a declaration and a warning. "We've come too far. It's time to finish this." Aaron took a deep breath. For years he had been running, evading the curse, the bloodlust that churned within him. He had thought that avoiding his past was the only way to live. But standing here, on the cusp of the unknown, he realized how wrong he had been. This was the moment that would define him. This was where he would learn the truth, not just about the curse, but about himself. Together, they approached the gate. The massive doors creaked open at their approach, as if the very fortress itself had been waiting for them. Inside, the stone corridors were silent, but the air felt thick, charged with an energy that seemed to hum beneath the surface. "This is it!" Alara said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is where everything changes." Aaron nodded. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew this much. He wasn't alone anymore, and he had the strength to face whatever awaited them. They walked deeper into the fortress, their footsteps echoing against the cold stone. As they turned a corner, they came face to face with a tall, imposing figure, an elder dressed in the robes of the ancient order that had been guarding the secret of the curse for centuries. His eyes were piercing, sharp, and calculating, as though he could see directly into Arin's soul. "You've come," the elder said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "I knew you would, but I wonder, are you ready to accept the truth?" Arin didn't hesitate. "I'm ready." The elder studied him for a moment longer before nodding. "Very well. You seek to control the curse, to master the power within you. But that power is not easily tamed. It requires sacrifice. It requires understanding that power alone is not enough. You must learn to wield it, not as a weapon, but as a part of who you are." Arin felt the weight of those words settle over him. It wasn't just about strength, it was about balance. The curse wasn't something to fight against, something to conquer. It was a part of him, and only by understanding it could he ever hope to truly control it. The elder turned and beckoned them forward. "Come then, you must face the trials. Only then will you be able to understand the full extent of your power." The trials were unlike anything Arin had ever experienced. Each challenge forced him to confront a different aspect of himself. The rage that had burned with him since childhood, the fear of what he might become, the guilt for the lives he had taken in his struggle for survival. But with every trial, he grew stronger. His mind sharpened, his body grew accustomed to the strange, unnatural power that flowed through his veins. And through it all, Elara was there. She watched him, never judging, always encouraging. In her presence, he felt the connection to his humanity, a reminder that there was more to life than power and survival. She was his anchor, the one constant in a world that seemed to be slipping out of control. By the end of the trials, Arin was exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally, but as he stood before the elder, he could feel it, the shift, the transformation. "You've done it," the elder said, his voice tinged with respect. "You've learned to control the curse. But remember, it's not just about power, it's about choice. What you do with it is up to you." Arin nodded, his eyes bright with newfound understanding. The curse no longer felt like a shackle. It felt like a gift, a power he could wield, not out of desperation or fear, but out of a choice to protect, to fight for something greater than himself. Elara stepped forward, her eyes searching his face. "Are you ready?" Arin took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the power within him, but also the weight of the choices that lay ahead. He knew that the journey was far from over. The world was still full of dangers, more enemies, more challenges. But now he wasn't just running from what he was running towards something, a future that he could shape, a life that he could control. "Yes," he said, his voice steady, "I'm ready." As they left the fortress, the wind had shifted. The storm that had once seemed to chase them now felt distant, a shadow fading in the light of a new dawn. Arin stood tall, his gaze fixed on the horizon, and for the first time he felt a sense of peace. He had faced the darkness within himself and emerged stronger for it. And as he walked beside Elara, he knew that he was no longer alone. The future was uncertain, but together they would face whatever came next. Because now, for the first time in his life, Arin understood what it meant to choose his own path, and that was worth more than all the power in the world.